This episode is sponsored in part by Honeycomb. When production is running slow, it's hard to know where problems originate. Is it your application code, users, or the underlying systems? I've got $5 on DNS, personally. Why scroll through endless dashboards while dealing with alert floods, going from tool to tool to tool that you employ, guessing at which puzzle pieces matter? Context switching and tool sprawl are slowly killing both your team and your business. You should care more about one of those than the other. Which one is up to you? Drop the separate pillars and enter a world of getting one unified understanding of the one thing driving your business: production. With Honeycomb, you guess less and know more. Try it for free at honeycomb.io/screaminginthecloud. Observability. It's more than just hipster monitoring.
Let's try something new. A last year in AWS roundup. Happy New Year to all you folks, and I'll talk to you in 2022. So let's summarize what happened over the course of this very strange year. Welcome to my attempt at last year in AWS, focusing on things that I found interesting or at least worthy of comment. We kicked off 2021 with a bang, with an attempted riot at the U.S. Capitol, which was promptly met by AWS, along with every other reputable company, booting Parler off of their platforms and out into the snow. I talked about this in an article called Parler's New Serverless Architecture, which I really should have taken as a harbinger of how the rest of the year was going to go. Sadly, I'm not that smart. I went on to kick the metaphorical dragon in a lengthy post that attempted to explain AWS compensation. I learned a lot from the responses to it. AWS absolutely does make exceptions for people, many of whom are unaware that they're an exception, but far and away, my favorite emails said things like, "This article pissed me off, so I went out and interviewed elsewhere. It turns out you were right, and I just got a 50% raise in my new job." Congrats to those people. Then came February. Nearly as momentous, Jeff Bezos declared that he was tired of selling cloud computing and wanted to instead focus on making himself iteratively more unlikable. This coincided with Andy Jassy's longtime dream of selling more underpants and fewer computers, so Andy Jassy became the new CEO of Amazon later in the year. At the time, there was no announcement as to who this new CEO of AWS was going to be. My money was on Matt Garman, but as we now know, I was wrong because I'm bad at predicting the future. I spent the rest of February and most of March being absolutely insufferable because I was profiled in the New York Times. I can't even think of a good snarky way to describe that just because almost a year later, I'm still flabbergasted this actually happened. Amazon finally had to step in and bring me back to reality at the end of March by loading some random VP up with entirely too much booze and turning them loose on Twitter to shitpost at sitting U.S. senators about easily disprovable things. Suddenly, it was no longer a mystery to me why Amazon PR generally takes a vow of silence as part of their new hire paperwork. It doesn't go so well when they don't. Around this time, former AWS exec Adam Selipsky was tired of his gig as Tableau's CEO, presumably because he got tired of selling something with a good user interface, so he came back to run AWS as their new CEO instead. I took it upon myself to be his onboarding buddy and explain what happened in his absence. Fun fact, he left AWS only a few months before I wrote the first issue of Last Week in AWS. I pointed out on Twitter at one point that there were 17 ways to run containers on AWS, which I turned into a blog post detailing each of them. Later, I wrote a second blog post about 17 more ways to run containers on AWS, which led to the absolute best email I've ever gotten from an Amazonian, pointing out that one of the ways I pointed out was technically a subset of another way, meaning that there were only really 33 ways to run containers on AWS instead of the full 34. I stand corrected.
This episode is sponsored in part by my friends at Cloud Academy. Something special just for you folks. If you missed their offer on Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever day of the week doing sales it is, good news. They've opened up their Black Friday promotion for a very limited time. Same deal. $100 off a yearly plan, $249 a year for the highest quality cloud and tech skills content. Nobody else is going to get this, and you have to act now because they have assured me this is not going to last for much longer. Go to cloudacademy.com, hit the Start Free Trial button on the homepage, and use the promo code CLOUD
when checking out. That's CLOUD. Like loud, what I am, with a C in front of it. They've got a free trial too, so you'll get 7 days to try it out to make sure it really is a good fit. You've got nothing to lose except your ignorance about cloud. My thanks to Cloud Academy once again for sponsoring my ridiculous nonsense.
In July, Andy became the new CEO of all of Amazon and announced 2 new Amazonian leadership principles. Success and scale bring broad responsibility was the first, while the second was strive to be Earth's best employer. That second one's an easy answer in any Amazon job interview. Tell me about an example of a time you X. First, can you tell me about a time you were Earth's best employer? AWS Infinidash was launched on Twitter as a running joke about a fake AWS service that doesn't really exist. It was a great joke that taught us a lot, but when a journalist reached out for help understanding it, it was time to pack it in before someone got too confused and tried to run it in production. Forrest Brazil went from voice of the AWS community to head of content at Google Cloud because someone at AWS slept on the hire and develop the best leadership principle and were all the poorer for it over on the AWS side of the world. I miss you, Forrest. AWS reInvent was in person again, and attending it was certainly an experience. My seminal reQuinvent virtual event was a hit. A particular bright light of the entire event was when I got to sit for half an hour with Rachel Thornton, AWS's actual chief marketing officer, and talk to her about how she saw her role. It was incredibly thought-provoking, and if I'm being sincere for a change, one of the highlights of my year. No sooner had that enormous conference wound down when I aired a combination birthday gift/attack ad for my dear friend Maddie Stratton, whose revenge will no doubt be absolutely legendary, and I suspect that's going to be a 2022 thing. And then US East 1 exploded, taking with it an awful lot of trust that had unfairly accrued to AWS's architectural decisions, and that was just a hop, skip, and a Log4j crisis away from the present day. But bring it on, 2022. I'm going to be louder next year.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.